Welcome back to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Bull. This segment is brought to you by my company, bullrealty.com. Check it out for customized asset and occupancy solutions. Well, today we're talking about multifamily. Please welcome my next guest. It's Paula Munger. She's AVP of Industry Research with the National Apartment Association. Paula, thank you for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me, Michael.
So Paula, one of the things that we're seeing in the news and people are talking about is rent control today. As you guys are kind of talking to and leading and rubbing elbows with all the apartment owners around the country, how much is that of a concern to the apartment industry today?
It's a big concern. So when Oregon passed its 7% cap plus inflation earlier this year, we hired a company to look at the impacts of rent control with a 7% cap. And while that might sound generous, the fear is that it starts at 7% and then it keeps getting lower and lower and lower until owners of properties have very little room to increase their net operating income. So this company modeled impacts of rent control, and we're about to release that research in a few weeks, and it looked at 4 pilot markets: Seattle, Portland, Chicago, and Denver, and it looked at the impact on the number of units that will not be built going forward with rent control, the amount of maintenance expenditures that will decrease annually, which could impact the supply because those properties might fall into disrepair, and the amount of values that properties will decrease, that properties will lose, and then ultimately that will show up in fewer property tax revenues from municipalities. So it's a big deal, and our members are very concerned.
So at the end of the day, it tends to potentially backfire and not to produce the results that were intended.
Exactly. It actually ends up with the prices in the properties that are not rent controlled. Those rents increase, and then it just adds to the affordability problem. And again, some of the properties that are naturally occurring affordable properties, if those don't have maintenance expenditures, like I said, some of those might be facing obsolescence, and that's not a good thing when we're struggling to keep up with demand right now.
Well, I guess if they're going to cap the gross rents, they're also capping our expenses, right?
Yeah, we certainly don't see that in property taxes. Our most recent income and expenses survey showed property taxes increasing. They are now the #1 cost for an owner-operator, and personnel is second.
So is there also a thought that if they're doing it in California and doing rent control in New York State, that pretty soon other states are really wanting to adopt the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we had the research done for markets that we started before Portland passed it, but markets that don't necessarily have it but are looking strongly at it. So Illinois, certainly, Colorado's another one, and then Washington State as well.
So, Paula, if listeners and viewers would like to utilize the research that you guys have done there to maybe share with their politicians, how might they access that?
Well, the rent control research is not published yet, but it will be by mid-November. But we also have a very good piece that is used with legislators called the Barriers to Apartment Construction. And that it ranks 58 markets by how difficult and easy it is to build new apartments. And that's on our website at naahq.org under research.
Okay. And then the outcome of rent control, that might be on there by mid-November?
Yes.
On the site as well. Okay, and let's talk about that barrier to new supply, because that construction costs have gone up, and obviously that's going to curtail supply in some cases. But a lot of municipalities, they don't really want them in their backyard, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we conducted a survey, and we had a 42% response rate from or 42% of the responses were from the private sector, the rest were from the public. And it was interesting to me because both sides recognized the problem of NIMBYism. So even people on the public side, these are people in city planning departments who are saying, we have a problem with this. And we have to go through, usually it's a lot of local not just council meetings, but community meetings, one after the other, and that just adds to the timeline of the project and, of course, adds to the cost as well. So even in markets where it's fairly easy to build, we saw that NIMBYism was one of the greatest factors that impedes things moving forward.
And the respondents in this survey about barrier to entry for apartment construction, was it, what were the main things? Was it the zoning and getting the permits, or was it more kind of cost related to impact fees and things like that?
Yeah, it's both. So certainly land costs and land availability were a big problem, followed by construction costs. I mean, we've been hearing that for years now, but it's true. There's still a shortage of labor on the construction side, and certainly those salaries are moving up further than than the wages in other industries. So the costs are big, as well as the NIMBYism and just the whole complexity. There's some markets. We broke them out by market, obviously, because everything's just so local, but some just have a very non-transparent system, and that makes it really difficult to plan and really difficult to stay within budget on a project.
Yeah, it does. We're talking with Paula Munger with the National Apartment Associations about multifamily, and Paula, there's been a great run for the multifamily world as far as occupancy and rates and growth in the market, and some people do wonder, is this going to continue? And you know, when you look at census data, when you look at future demand generators, what do you see?
We see continued strength. I mean, everyone's being cautious. Obviously, there's a lot of talk of a downturn and when it's going to start and how severe it's going to be. But we see the demographic fundamentals are so strong. The census just released some data showing growth in renter households. That was after we had seen an increase in the homeownership rate, and so obviously a decline in renter households. But 18 looked good. 19 is looking good in terms of growth in renter households. And the other thing they just released was household income. And we saw for all households, income growth was basically flat in 2018, but it increased by 6.1% for renters. So I think, and also you see a lot of stories on there's more and more higher income households, and this just points to that. So we see a good, strong demand. People are choosing it rather than it being a stepping stone to homeownership, and that's continuing. I think we're starting to see it in the data, especially in census data.
Yeah, well, that's great because it seems like affordability could be one of the issues for the apartment industry, right? As all these construction costs and barrier to entry is increasing, we've got households that maybe can't afford some of these rents. So it's good to see an income increase for these tenants, because is affordability a concern for apartment owners today?
Yes, definitely. And just to note that while we saw good income growth in 2018, it was stagnant for so long that it's going to take a lot more than 1 year of growth to make up for the disparities in a lot of markets in terms of rent versus income. But yeah, our owners and operators, our members, are concerned about affordability and concerned about, we talk about the development costs, but it's just operating costs. Those costs are going up every year. Our last survey showed they went up by nearly 10%. So that's a big issue. So it's hard to keep control of those costs and not pass at least some of that on through in rent.
Yeah, so that 10% in increase, I guess a lot of that could have been property taxes. Where are they seeing the most increases in their expenses?
Yeah, definitely property tax. We've been doing this survey for over 20 years, and in 2013, property tax surpassed personnel and salaries as the greatest expense for apartment owners and operators, and that just has steadily climbed. This past year, not surprisingly, there's a labor shortage. That's also something we hear a lot about, but we did see personnel costs go up by about 5.5%, which is really well above the typical 3% wage growth we saw last year in other sectors.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Paula, we appreciate your time on the show today. What would you leave our audience with to think about the multifamily world moving forward?
I think just continued, we're looking to next year to be a continued year of growth. Maybe moderate, maybe it will be moderate this year, where last year I thought was going to be moderate, but it's pretty strong, and just keeping ahead of some of these legislative issues that popping up, that while they're well-intentioned, they often have unintended consequences.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. And I'm glad you guys are there to help us in the industry. I grew up in the industry, and it's interesting you talk about affordability. I remember we used to like to see that a tenant's rent and utilities were like 25% of their income, and now those numbers have really expanded. I guess, do you see some of that with qualifying tenants out there?
Yeah, we do see that. There's the measurements from census typically put it into more than 30% of income is burdened, and then severely burdened is more than 50% of income. Actually, and the good news with that, though, is the past few years we've been seeing that trending down a bit, but it still quite affects quite a few families out there that are paying more of their share of income on housing costs, and other costs going up as well too. So it's challenging.
Yeah, it is challenging, and it's also interesting to see that a lot of people are willing to give up a little bit larger percentage of their income for their housing because they want the convenience of living where they want to live, right? They want to live in these areas where maybe you can walk and have transit, and maybe they pay a little bit more, but their lifestyle is much more to their liking.
Exactly, and we see that with amenities research we've done in the past as well. It's community that's really important. They're willing to pay extra to feel part of a community and to socialize, to have social spaces, and certainly convenience is key. Anytime you can make a resident's life more easier, that's a resident you're going to keep. Yeah,
we're bringing the market an $85 million kind of price range Class A projects, and it's in a mixed use kind of redevelopment of an old mill, and all the tenants there get to walk outside and have a lake and walking paths, and they get have restaurants and get their hair done. I mean, it's just everything is so convenient, and it is a neat community. Well, Paula, great information as usual. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Sure, thank you.
If you'd like more information from the National Apartment Association and Paula Munger, their website is naahq.org, and certainly go there if you want to help your politicians understand what rent control can actually do. It might do the opposite of what they're thinking, and the barrier to entry for apartment construction also could be something interesting to share with your local politicians and leaders. So thank you for joining us on America's Commercial Real Estate Show. Please share the show. Please let us know what you think and connect with us on your favorite social media. I'm Michael Bull. Until next week, be sure you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Bull Realty. For customized asset and occupancy solutions, visit bullrealty.com. Commercial Agent Success Strategies. Incredible training for commercial agents. Visit commercialagentsuccess.com.